Hi, Purva. We're live.
Hi. Okay. Nora, are you there? Because I can't see.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Okay, so I'm just going to start the talk then. Okay. Cool. Okay. So hello and a warm welcome to everyone joining us for the third talk of the C Conversation series of this monsoon semester. And of course, we have our students in this talk. It's nice to see some very dear alumni here as well. And there are some familiar names on the screen who join us on several occasions. And for everyone who is joining us for the first time, C Conversations is a semester-wise talk series curated around a different question every time. And these questions are led by the research interests of the teachers at the School of Environment and Architecture. Our most recent series last year was on technological practice as a deep, artistic, and Riyazi inquiry. And before that, on questions of inhabitation in an expanded sense as mediated by the idea of care. And I'd like to add that the Urban Center Mumbai has been generously supporting these talks for several years now. Our series this time is on the question of drawing, where we open up the meaning of drawing to include many possible interpretations, closely looking at drawing as a verb, drawing as a noun, and mostly at drawing as a means to create new worlds and inhabit them by establishing new conventions of seeing. And we're joined today by Nora Wuttke, and it's so special to have her really as a part of this series because, in a sense, she has been a part of our thinking on the drawing question for the last year or so. And I have been following whatever I have found of her work online after a friend who was doing her master's at the SOAS went for one of her lectures and told me how much she enjoyed how she spoke about drawing, which led me to finding Nora speaking briefly about drawing is an investigative fieldwork practice, and we've cobbled together some observations from her writing and drawing, and her work is cited in the drawing thinking course that we conduct for students in the 9th semester, which is in their final year. I'll just introduce Nora now. Nora is a social anthropologist and architectural designer, using her art practice as a mode of inquiry in her academic research. She holds an architecture degree from the Technical University in Munich and a PhD in social anthropology from SOAS, the University of London. Nora is currently a postdoctoral researcher at Durham University, fellow of the Durham Energy Institute, and research associate at SOAS. And her scholarship sits at the intersection of infrastructure, health, and energy, bound together by her methodological interventions with art making. Welcome, Nora. I'm going to ask you to present your work. I will rejoin after. If any of you have any questions, please type them out in the box. We'll get to them after the discussion, or you can leave them on YouTube as well, and we'll get to them here. So thanks.
Thank you. That's such a lovely introduction. I didn't expect that. Lovely. Yes, so I'm going to share my screen, which we practiced earlier, that's great. Going into slideshow mode. Perfect. So I'm going to talk about drawing as a research method, which is really about drawing relationships. So let me start, actually, I'm not going to be reading at you for the entire time, but let me start by reading to you an ethnographic vignette. We social anthropologists love to do that. It's a bit of like, you could maybe understand it as a bit of creative nonfiction. So I'll be talking about drawing at a hospital, which was my PhD research, in which I'm doing again, actually, in my postdoctoral research now. I will briefly try to conceptualize drawing as well, and then talking you through two other small projects that continued my thinking around drawing and really edited, kind of like widened it out to artful ethnography, and where art making is really a mode of unlearning and then relearning. So let me start with the vignette. A A bunch of young monks sprawl over the railing of what seems to be a newly built multi-story dormitory. The railings glint in the low afternoon sun. It's a Wednesday in November, Yangon's cold season, with temperatures around 25 degrees. Equipped with sketchbooks and pens, I had ventured into the tight alleyways of Thayeta Monastery Complex, a collection of over 60 monasteries immediately west of Yangon General Hospital. Some of the monks spy me. Then more and more appear on the verandas. What is this foreigner doing here, drawing of all things? Before anybody can start talking to me, I quickly turn away onto tidy tarmacked paths, bounded by the backs of buildings or high walls. While walking, I sketch the ground plan. Open space and streets I shade black. The built areas remain white. I stop to draw a roof detail of one of the old teak buildings. My attention turns towards the alley's vistas. Yangon General Hospital's red roofs, domed turrets are visible in the background beyond the low 1960s concrete structure that is the A&E. A woman with short black hair wearing a longi and a blouse is heading straight for me. With bright eyes, she looks at the lines on my page and hurls questions at me. Where am I from? What am I drawing here? What am I doing? I'm uncomfortable, wondering what the stranger wants from me. I cannot hide, so I stretch my Burmese skills to its limits. Researching the daily life of Yangon General Hospital piques her interest. She starts talking. Her sister is an ambulatory patient at YGH. They are staying at one of the monasteries while she receives radiotherapy treatment. Every weekday for 3 weeks, 25 in total, the sister spends her days in the hospital's shaded waiting areas for the few minutes of radiation. They come from Bago, approximately 90 kilometers northeast of Yangon, where the public hospital does not offer radiotherapy. Auntie Ang and her sister go home every weekend, leaving Friday afternoon, returning Monday at the crack of dawn. They make the 2-hour bus journey from the highway bus station, a good hour from downtown Yangon, where we are now. She begs me along to meet her sister. I get nervous. Unexplainable fear takes hold of me, but I go along. We stand in front of the 2-story building where her sister is waiting for Auntie Ang to return with rice for dinner, shoes lined up neatly by the door. I bail out. I excuse myself with having to cook dinner. After all, it's nearly 6 p.m. Her piercing eyes show her disappointment. She invites me to visit any other time. As I turn away, I regret it. It will take me the rest of the week to muster the courage to return, but I will. I come every day for the following week, sit and chat. One day I bring Kantin, my trusted translator. Auntie Ang is a devoted Buddhist. While her sister waits for her daily dose of radiation at the hospital next door, Auntie Ang spends her days praying, meditating, reading the Buddhist teachings between breakfast, fetching rice for dinner, washing clothes in the bathrooms behind the dormitory. It's not Auntie Ang's first time at YGH. She has accompanied more than one family member before. As an unmarried woman, she's a good attendant, compassionate, company for a distraught outpatient undergoing treatment, a vigilant bedside carer for an inpatient. She knows the hospital's ebbs and flows, a wonderful interlocutor who offered me my first glimpse of the details of daily life between the hospital buildings, treatments, rhythms, and institutional routines, who I would have never met had it not been for my drawing practice. So meeting Auntie Ang in this setting, or actually she seeking me out, was my first encounter with this like bustling life beyond the hospital campus. And it was my art practice, this mode of drawing, that was instrumental in this. Here, drawing allowed me to be in this semi-public place, to see what I probably would not necessarily have seen, and to engage with somebody and meet somebody, but also engage with myself through those lines on paper. And so I think in the first lecture of this series, there was a lot talked about seeing. Last week we spoke about engaging a lot through kind of like different media, and maybe today we think a bit more about, or we come to this mode of being, drawing as a way of being. So the hospital really came alive this encounter between bodies and buildings and humans and non-humans through those lines on paper. And so while this was my first encounter as a social anthropologist and an ethnographer with the hospital, I personally was no stranger to the hospital. I had actually spent 3 years at this hospital, of which you see a historic photograph right now, developing, renovating its colonial buildings, and then developing a master plan for the entire site. And when I arrived, I really did not know very much about the hospital and what I was actually supposed to be doing there. I had come from Shanghai, where I had lived for 4 years and worked as an architect. I had trained as an anthropologist at that time already, but was working as an architect with David Chipperfield Architects and was doing a lot of museums. And it was my first kind of encounter with a hospital, but also with this colonial structure that was suddenly in front of me. I wasn't allowed to speak about very much other than the kind of renovation processes. So I spent my days really drawing details, a lot of door details and window details. I was supposed to design weather screens for that hospital. But then the election happened in Myanmar, which was just a month or two after I had arrived, and a lot changed. And suddenly the hospital came to my team and asked us to develop a master plan for the site. So we followed really the ins and outs of the hospital, into the infrastructure below and above ground, and we assembled drawings of the campus. With transparent paper over site plans, we assumed a bird's eye view of this campus. And we produced a 200 pages document in Burmese and in English that kind of drew this hospital together and created this master plan of that hospital, which really was a vision of a future that might or might not come, a set of drawings from ever differencing bird's eye views. So this position as the architectural engineer on campus had offered me like a very unique perspective on this hospital from above most of the time, and zooming in and out of different scales, as we saw earlier as well. But as I was working on campus for more than 2 years, almost 3 years, I kind of came to ask myself, what is really going on here? What is kind of this clinical practice really about? And in a way, I started to ask myself how this expert knowledge of the architect and all these distinct perspectives that I was assembling from the M&E engineers and from the hospital space planners, from the civil engineers, the structural engineers, that is always like turning focus on and off, translates into kind of a bigger picture, or can be turned into a whole, and into what I was yearning for as a trained anthropologist, like an ethnographic intimacy with the site, which means kind of a deeper understanding of the events, the practices, and the rhythms that are going on at the hospital beyond this idea of the perspective, which is ever incomplete in a way. How could I gain this intimacy without losing overview at the same time? How could I continue moving between scales? And where might be the intersection of my two disciplines, the anthropologist and the architect? I was really fascinated by the detailed realities of daily life and those relationships and affective atmospheres that really intrigued me, intrigued me at the time, and that I really wanted to learn more about. So I picked up my pens and sketchbooks yet again and embarked on yet another year of drawing the hospital. And it was this like non-verbal way of engaging with the hospital that led me into so many conversations, but conversations that were quite different. So I realized that I started to draw and was drawing because when words fail us, we might be looking somewhere else for inspiration. I also thought I knew the hospital really well. But when we think we know the world around us, we might be looking for something to unsteady the ground below our feet in order to unlearn it and maybe understand it better in a different way. So most conversations I had during fieldwork were quite fluid in their medium. Some were verbal, some were non-verbal. A lot was through hands, a lot was through nods of the head, and a lot was also almost through my drawings. They were little bridges. As I was in this space of the hospital, I was allowed to be there as an artist. They could understand me. I wasn't threatening. I wasn't having a notebook that was writing things down. They could actually, loads of people constantly approached me and were looking at my drawings and were like, okay. Interestingly, there was an understanding of an artist in institutional spaces. Yangon University has had an artist in residence for decades. So maybe I was a bit kooky, but I wasn't threatening in that sense. So almost my sketches could almost be read as nonverbal quotes and a voice beyond the text that I then later produced. The drawing practice itself was also a way of really listening with my body and extending a level of care to this environment that was in there. I would really, this intense way of seeing and drawing something and reproducing it onto a page was really a way to tap into the rhythms of the daily life at the hospital. So what really happened in this drawing practice as a research method was challenging this very dominating idea of words in research. And this ties in with contemporary feminist methodologies that create counter narratives of dominant models of research that prefer the spoken word or the written word at many times. So in this drawing practice, or this commitment really to this drawing practice in research, the embodied nature of research and field research is foregrounded through the act of drawing in itself. So really what I want to get at is that drawing is more than kind of like those sketches. They might show you something, but what they really are and offer as a research process is a way to see the world very differently, to be somewhere, as I was able to be in this monastery, where it would have been quite strange had I just been standing around or had I been writing. And engaging, as we saw with Auntie Ang. So as an architectural designer and engineer, I had also been drawing the hospital. But in that practice, I was walking around and I was constantly looking for problems. Or I had been told about a problem that I was looking at. I was looking for solutions. I was sketching ideas. As a social anthropologist, I spent my time being, observing, not looking for something or seeking out problems, but deeply thinking with my hands through the drawing process about what is in front of me, creating knowledge about what I see, which I might not be able to understand in that moment, but still I'm able to follow with my pen onto the page and create familiarity with those manifold rhythms and the daily life around me. And anthropology is a human scale discipline. And that is what it has in common with architecture. Both are very much human-scaled disciplines, but move between micro and macro. However, architecture is mostly preoccupied with a future that might or might not come, and with problems, solutions, necessities, lack, while in ethnographic fieldwork, it's about being intensely in the moment and thinking and recording in the sketchbook in real time. So the experience of drawing as an anthropologist and drawing as an architect are different and similar at the same time. As an architect, I draw speculations about an imagined future, whereas as an anthropologist, I draw what I see and use drawings to see. And in both cases, I use my hand to think. So just very briefly, I know you probably talked about drawing as seeing before, and basically in this conceptualization, I think about Berger, who's a British art critic who wrote a lot about seeing and different ways of seeing. And we see what we look at, and drawing is discovery. Those are kind of key things that he speaks about. And the act of drawing focuses us to look and training us to see. And as a social anthropologist, and for my research practice, which I think is valuable beyond that particular discipline, drawing gets us beyond what we think we see or what we know to be seeing. Drawing really challenges what we think we know. And you can try and draw a bicycle from memory. I'm sure most people will go like, oh yeah, I know what a bicycle is. But when you start drawing it, it becomes clear that maybe you don't know so well, or you have certain perceptions. Or if I ask you to draw a dog, what kind of dog, etc., etc., etc. At the same time, drawing shows our biases very, very, very quickly. So when I started drawing in Yangon as an anthropologist, this is what I did. In good architecture manner, I had a black pen and I followed lines on a facade. And I remember myself thinking, oh my God, what am I supposed to be doing now? And that's what happened. So this was my disciplinary bias, in a sense. I did get beyond that. And I started to really shift my focus to the manifold relationships between people, but also between people and non-humans, in this case, the building, for example. At the same time, if somebody draws a room and all the people from a bird's eye view, and the people are looking and looking down on everybody, you might also consider what that might mean about this person's positionality, or how they are thinking about this encounter and where they are placing themselves, possibly. In a way, drawing is seeing, is really seeing differently. But in this, also the materiality matters. So it's the messiness of the drawing process in itself that is quite valuable. So with a hardback sketchbook and ink pen, I can move very, very quickly through spaces. Whereas imagine you have an easel and watercolors, you're stationary. So your encounter in that moment will be very different, and you will be seeing very different things. So the medium and the materiality that I choose to draw with also plays an important role in this spatial encounter, and it sets the rhythms for the engagement with the site. So I had very different days drawing the hospital. Like some days I would have unpacked my bag in the evening coming home from the hospital, and in the morning had to rush out because I was meeting somebody and I had forgot my pens, and I bought a ball pen on the fly very quickly. And I ended up actually on those days with much more kind of like drawing writing hybrids. Whereas on other days, I thought well, actually not another day, so it was a big part of the research process at the beginning, I realized that as a trained architect, I somehow had mostly brought black ink pens and gray studio markers. And I wasn't seeing color. I realized I wasn't really paying attention to people's clothes. I started to realize I wasn't paying attention to the stark red in contrast to the green that was maybe growing out of buildings' eaves. So I started to take colors. I tried to use pastel colors, but that slowed me down. It was messy. My hands were messy. I felt I always had to find somewhere to sit in the shade and have a ledge beside me where I could have my pastel colors. So when I went for a trip home over Christmas, I stocked up on colorful what are they called? Studio markers. And suddenly I started to really note down people's dress, and I realized the subtle nuances in that as well, which again led me into another inquiry. Who was wearing their longi very long? Who was wearing it shorter? What were kind of the work processes and the daily life that they were living with those clothes? So that really led me into other encounters, into other questions, into other encounters in that sense. So when I had my colorful pens, it really kind of made me realize the hues and the shades and the light and the shadow, literally and figuratively. And it made me also kind of relax. I had my medium. I had found my medium for myself. So I think that's also quite important, because as the researcher, you're also part of all of it in a way. Just some examples of some clothes and the different colors that the building had. And over time, the medium also became less prescribed. So I would, for example, start using sketch paper again and overlay things that I had seen on top of each other. And it was kind of like this layering of paper was almost a way of layering my thoughts. My hands were thinking with each stroke, and kind of the use, and I was thinking about the use of the different spaces. So I started to layer my understanding through these layers of the drawings. And I'm quite interested in now. At the time, I used A3 sketchbooks, which by themselves as a medium already is like you have a page, you draw on it, then it's full, or you decide this is the page, then you go on. So it has like a chronology around it already. But when I've been working with students and done drawing workshops, for example, quite a few people have used tablets. So I'm really curious to think about what happens if I'm drawing in a tablet in this infinite space where I can just like keep moving outwards further and further. What does this do to my thinking in a way? So what drawing allowed me to do as well, as I mentioned in the beginning, was unlearning the place. So rather than going into this hospital where I knew almost everybody, I could have gone in and said, like, I need to talk to this person or that person. I allowed myself to just follow my drawing curiosity. So I would arrive in the morning and I would follow maybe a water pipe, and it would draw me, it would suddenly drop me into a place that I had actually never been to. Partly because it was also relatively new. It was the laundry, for example, but there were many of such examples. So I became familiar with this hospital in a new way. And at the same time, the hospital became familiar with me. As I said, I was this artist who was drawing around campus. I was there every day. People knew me. The patients who spent a week there, or the family members, started to kind of to also understand, to develop a level of understanding, and especially the staff, who would slowly become more and more familiar with me. So really, drawing is not simply representing form. When I'm drawing, I'm looking at the contents, the context, the movement, relatedness, and also my own positionality. And it's about relationships, and it makes relationships visible in different ways. It abstracts at the same time. It focuses, and all of these parts, and it also has a frame. Something is not in it, for example. So it all tells me, all these aspects of the drawing really tell me quite a lot. So those drawings in their own way make connections and abstractions. At the same time, it's an embodied experience. You are yourself in that place. You're hot, you're cold, you're wet. When I'm doing drawing exercises with students here in London, the amount of time I hear like, "Ooh, I don't want to go out. It's too cold. It's too wet. I don't want to get wet." So it really made me think about my own body in that space as well, and what it does to the research project. So drawing also records this subliminal. I can see in my sketches when I have been stressed. I can see on the original pages when it has rained, or when it was particularly humid, or when there was a storm. And it's really, by pulling all of this together, it's really a meditative moment of intense perception. And to understand that, on a more conceptual level, I draw on Victor Turner, who is a social anthropologist from the 70s. So when I'm talking about kind of embodied research practices, I'm by no means the first one to do that. Victor Turner said, "Rituals, carnivals, dramas, and films are liminal areas of time and space, open to the play of thought, feeling, and free will." And his work has been, and this conceptualization has been used a lot, as you might see. Rituals, carnivals, dramas, films has been talked about a lot in performing arts, but less so in fine art or in kind of drawing circles necessarily. But I find it's a very useful way to understand what is happening when we are drawing. Essentially, what Victor Turner is talking about are those liminal areas, and something that he calls comunitas, that happens in those moments of carnival, dramas, and films. It's kind of in between space. Something hasn't happened yet. Something hasn't happened yet, but something is going to happen. And according to Turner, it is exactly this in between space that is full of creativity, of innovation, but also of critical thinking. And it's a subversive space, and it's suspended from constraints. And maybe that's exactly the reason why authorities are so often worried and threatened by artists, because artists are able to enter this liminal space. And the drawing practice allows us to enter this liminal space. Before I'm putting my pen onto the page, I do not know exactly what is going to happen. I might start a drawing, but something completely different might come out of it. What is also happening is what he calls comunitas, kind of like an intense oneness with your surroundings. And if you are imagining to draw a portrait, you need to look so carefully at somebody. You really notice the little lines and the flaws that this moment of comunitas becomes. That is what I mean. And it can be with another person, it can be with a scenario, but it can also be with a landscape or a building or a process that is in front of you. So this moment of liminality can occur many, many times, maybe while you're doing the same sketch. Could be a longer process where you are trying to really draw a specific thing. I'm looking at a little plant that's in front of me, and that might be maybe 5 minutes, for me probably rather 3 minutes. I'm really quick. I draw very quickly. But it might also be the moment of being as an artist in your art studio, and it's a moment of liminality, a moment of in-betweenness. The artwork is not there yet. You don't quite know what is going to happen, and then something might come out of it at the end. So really, I see the value of drawing in this liminal space, in this in-between moment, in this experience that drawing allows you to have. So in a sense, drawing is secondary. The drawing itself is secondary. It's the drawing, the verb, that is important here. And that then really maybe makes you understand what it means to be somebody in a hospital bed who needs to go to the bathroom. And there might be the statutory distances might all be correct, and you might have enough bathrooms per patient. But what about this person who is in a bed, who needs to kind of like wiggle out of it, drop into the wheelchair, hopefully manages to get to the bathroom with the help of a family member, all the obstacles that might be in the way. So I came home after my field work that I did at this hospital in Yangon for a year with 11 sketchbooks and 633 little individual sketches to write my PhD. And I got at the task at hand. I started writing and developed something that I call writing with buildings, which again, I was tapping into my architectural training, a sensibility for space and for materials, for light, for texture, that I brought then into my writing practice. And in this, again, my sketches became valuable again. I re-engaged with them. I had scanned them while I was in Yangon, and then I reorganized them. I used OneNote, I organized them, and I started to looking through them again and what stories they were really telling me. I was arranging them. So these are actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individual drawings that I arranged into a vignette to create this atmosphere of the ward of that day. So I created those, what I called visual vignettes, and I was writing. But a year before I submitted my thesis, I got stuck. And I was grappling with rhythms particularly, and ways to kind of like conceptualize rhythms. And I was drawing, I was trying to kind of connect to the work of a dead old white Frenchman, Lefebvre, which wasn't very productive. So I was like, right, I'm going to do what I teach, and I'm going to go back to my drawings, and I'm going to see what they are telling me. So I rented a studio, and I started reproducing those little drawings in another medium, yet again, onto those sheets. And I got a grant to do and a gallery space in London, and I installed an exhibition which was called Hospital Echoes, which were these near one-to-one banners that recreated, where the vision was to really recreate a rhythm of the hospital. And as I was standing in my installations and the sketches were filling the room, I really realized what it was all about. What was my research all about? And I'm going to show you the film now. It's only 3 minutes, I think. Yes, we have time. It's only 3 minutes. It is the sounds that you hear are sound recordings that I took at the hospital, which are yet another layer of kind of what I call artful ethnography. They are in a way sketches as well, but sound sketches that I collated together to come to kind of like create this film. So it's the film of the exhibition, and then those soundscapes. I'm not going to go into detail about the sound work right now, and you're very welcome to ask me about it later. But I wanted to focus on the drawing aspect of it. So here we go. So really what I realized as I was kind of putting it all together, and I was re-engaging with my drawings yet again, tracing them once more in a different way. And maybe it was part because the pandemic happened, and I wasn't allowed to go onto wards. But actually a lot of the work had been also done, had started already before as well. But what I realized was that what the research was about is the spaces in between. Kind of like the interstitial space between buildings and bailiwicks, between those physical structures and the institutional structures, where sometimes, which become formalized in certain ways again as well, because those spaces are so essential for clinical care. And so this installation almost became a spatial argument that you could walk through and stand in, which also created wonderful conversations. Again, this mode of engaging through drawing. Quite a few. A student was there from Myanmar, from Yangon, and she told me the whole story about her experience with her family in the hospital. There's hardly a Burmese person who doesn't know Yangon General Hospital, which is really quite interesting. And this very engaging medium helps me also to ever understand a little bit more about this place. But it also really helped me to realize a very important, more academic point that I was making, which was really important in the realm of medical anthropology, which was medicine happens also beyond and in between the clinical purview. So often these spaces remain unnoticed in hospital ethnography, so this scholarship of anthropologists. They usually write about hospitals, about wards or about the care or about a specific disease, and where they are not, they're writing about laboratories or maybe patient pathways. So really this particular practice really helped me to tighten the theoretical argument. So basically the making of this exhibition and of this installation was part of the analysis in a way. And I would love to really bring this installation to Yangon, back to Yangon, to continue to having more conversations and really create this space. I wasn't able to have the soundscape at the gallery in the shows that I had so far. So I would really love to bring that together and work a little bit more with the sound, with those like sound sketches in a way. So just to finish up, now it is 5 years since I made this sketch, I think 4 years at least. I have finished the PhD and the kind of like this epos that's based, that kind of like that these sketches were part of. But I'm working now on new writing projects. I'm also working again in a hospital, this time in the UK. And again, I'm using drawing. And yet again, drawing proves to be a really useful methodology. And being more than a methodology, being actually like a way of knowing. So in starting, embarking on a new writing project, which is about artful ethnography and all the things that I'm talking to you about today, even though I haven't been back to Yangon since 2020, which was shortly before a really horrible COVID wave and the military coup that yet again toppled the country into armed conflict. I'm coming back to my sketches and I'm working with them yet again. I've printed everything out. I'm cutting them apart and I'm adding text on top and in between and thinking about using sketch paper to kind of like write on top or writing directly into them. So really, I'm yet again experimenting what else these lines on paper can tell me or want to tell me. So just to end, I think it's become quite clear. It is not about the drawing, but it's about drawing as a verb. The experience of drawing and really understanding drawing as an epistemological project, as a way of knowing and of producing knowledge, and through the commitment to the art practice, and in this case, the commitment to drawing. Thank you. And if you want to contact me, that's it. And I'm going to stop sharing, right?
Sure, yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Nora. That was so wonderful. I just feel that the drawing as question is opened up in so many important ways. The drawing is the medium that subverts power relationships on the field. The drawing is making clear relationships. Drawing is softening the field, actually. And what I felt was especially useful is, drawing as a way to see and a way to be, how you said it. And what I feel has been most important, actually, is, the processes that produce the drawing and the form that the drawing takes. And this whole question on what the drawing enables, on why drawing is relevant, it is for students, and actually not even students, for people that are increasingly distanced from the act. And I feel that the camera actually becomes this easy scapegoat, but it isn't entirely because of, this omnipresence of technology and the mobile phone camera as a convenient tool on the field, especially from what we see. But it's also because of this burden that we ourselves place on the drawing, that it is a complete thing, that it ought to approximate what the eye sees, that it is a reproduction of some kind of a perceived reality. And there is this thingness, that there is this weight of what it ought to be, what it ought to become, that we carry, that already makes the drawing for you before you even set the pen to paper. And then it becomes about something other than seeing, which is completely removed from the question of why we draw. And I feel that that is one of the foremost things that your talk is contending with, really. I have this slightly bad sense that you may have already answered a lot of the questions that I have, because you articulated it so clearly, what the drawing does. But maybe we'll be able to extend the talk. I one of the first things is that, I feel that it is almost impossible to speak of the nature of your work and your questions without referencing, Michael Taussig, that becomes a reference for us as well, who speaks entirely about drawing in the fieldwork notebook. And he holds the drawing up as something that has to contend with, the two great and favored forms of the record, which is that of writing and that of photography, where, writing is too frenzied, and the closer it gets at trying to hold the field, the more the reality of that field eludes it. And as you mentioned, there is a dominance and an impenetrability with writing. And with photography, it is, alien to the sketchbook. It is some kind of an intervening medium. It is an obstacle between you and an active participation in the field. And there's also, John Berger, who says that photograph tries to stop time while a drawing tries to encompass it. But the thing with Taussig, actually, is that he's constantly suggesting this almost magical, mystical power of the drawing, where he says that, it comes from another realm that may not be immediately accessible. It captures something invisible and auratic. It does everything that a photograph and that the writing is not able to do, because it is tangential to, what both of these things are trying to do. So they are suggestive and metaphysical. So what do you think is at work for the drawing to be spoken of in these terms, actually?
Yeah, I love. So I just saw in the chat, I think there was no audio for the video, right?
It came up a little bit later. I was just wondering about that as well, because for the first half of it, there is no audio, and then the atmospheric sounds sort of come in towards the second half. So I was wondering if...
I'll just put I put a link. Let me just quickly, I put a link.
Sure.
To the video. It's on my Instagram, so apologies, it's not trying to get more followers, but it's the only place where I have it, where I actually have it online. But I'll put that link in, then people can have a look at it later. I love how you speak about the burden of the drawing, actually. Sorry to derail, but I think that's really, because I remember, particularly as an architecture student, I was taught in Munich, and there was this like strong school, and it was like lines, and you had the slightly wiggly line. It was like a very particular way of drawing. And I couldn't draw. I wasn't able to draw like that. And we would go on drawing excursions, and I was dreading, and I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be sitting in this like square in an Italian city, and it's hot, and I don't know what to draw. I can't draw this. And like all the burden and the expectation of what drawing was supposed to be. And it was a tutor who looked at my drawings and was like, try coal. Try to use coal. Don't use the, don't. And I started just drawing light and shadow. And through that, I kind of like started to maybe come more to like a drawing practice. And actually, as an architect, I didn't draw that much. Like I'm a modeler. Like I've always designed buildings through model making. And it was through anthropology that I came back to this training of drawing, and really started to have to let go of the expectation and tap into this understanding. I'm tapping here into a liminal moment, into something in between. And I only realized that also I didn't go in with Turner and thinking about the liminality and carnivals and all of those things and rituals. That came through kind of like, that really evolved through the practice itself, and through a commitment to the practice, which I think gives it kind of the validation as well, as a research method. And I mean, Tausig and his particularly the article "What do drawings want?" is it's great. It's seminal. It really really pulls together a lot of things. I think that writing and drawing, actually, it's not something, and photography I'll come to in a moment, but I don't think it doesn't preclude each other. I think it comes together very nicely. And I think as an architect, that's almost instinctual. Like when people ask me, how does the drawing and the writing come together? I'm like, well, it just does. But like, I mean, you hardly have a drawing, an architectural drawing, that doesn't have writing in it as well, at least like some forms of notation. So in that they come together, but also you can't express everything in writing. And with the photography, I think my husband is a photographer, so we talk a lot, or he's an artist, but comes from a photography background. We talk a lot about photography. There's a fantastic article, which is Drawing with the Camera. It's about basically and taps into this like similar, it's like taps on similar ideas. And sometimes when we talk about photographs and really think about how they have been made, there is an extreme intimacy as well. And if you extend this care that you extend to a drawing with thinking about what is in the frame, what am I drawing, what is outside of the frame, if you extend that same care to working with a camera, you can achieve fantastic work. Like you have to sometimes be extremely close to people, much closer than when I'm drawing necessarily, in order to get a certain shot. But if it's most of the time, I would really agree with Berger and the stopping time vis-a-vis encompassing time. And I feel this takes away the burden of the drawing as well, thinking about it in that way. A drawing can always be added to, it can be deducted from, and it can become many different things. When I came back from the field, I actually never wanted to show my sketches because I was like, oh no, they're not good enough. But I was like, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. It's about what the story that they tell, more than anything else.
Right.
Yeah. Does this answer your question?
Close, very, very close. I had another question for you, which was, I think you've already spoken at length about it, which was, about how you would describe the process of embodiment and the kinds of drawings that get produced from it, because it seems that there is this overwhelming consensus on drawing being an embodied act, whether you have, Berger, who suggests that it's this conversation. You have Johanni Polasma also, who speaks of being corporeally entangled with the drawn. But I just wanted to, like, just as a side note, I came across Victor Turner's work in this Ursula Le Guin essay, where it's called A Non-Euclidean View of California as a Cool Place to Be. And because you spoke about the idea of communitas, she also says that, just to extend that articulation, where she says that you shouldn't confuse it with archaic or primitive societies, because it is a dimension of all societies, past and present. And she also goes on to articulate it, like, by asking that you not pit it against structure, where structure in society is cognitive, communitas is existential, and structure classifies, communitas reclassifies. And what I feel is the nicest, and what ties into what you were saying as well, is that structure is expressed in legal and political institutions, and communitas in art and in religion. So I felt that sort of just extended that point. And coming back to, the drawing as question again, it seems that among the many, many things that the drawing is, it is also a dialogue with your surroundings, where you're getting to know your surroundings, the surroundings are getting to know you. And because it's a dialogue, and because it is with the field, and the field is a fickle thing, it may not always be, a very settled thing, a very peaceful thing. So when the dialogue is in argument, or the dialogue takes on another form, how is the drawing affected by the shifting nature of, the kinds of presences that the field brings out?
I think, yeah, I love what you this description of communitas and structure, and field work, being in the field, is in itself always an embodied practice, but often not. It's not necessarily always reflected on. Like it sometimes stays in the background, and our own embodied learnings might remain unreflected. Like, I don't know, the way we move, the way we nod our head, the way we speak to people, the way we might be sitting, like all the things kind of like that are very unconscious necessarily. And I feel drawing draws them out. Like it makes it, as I said earlier, it makes them visible in certain ways by reflecting on maybe how people are sitting. Makes me more aware that maybe I'm sitting differently, or where people are sitting tells a particular story of my own body in the field, and maybe my own preferences in that. The field is tricky. What is it? Where does it begin and where does it end? And in a way, I thought my field was very clear because I had drawn it so many times. It had a wall around it that I had drawn many, many times when I was doing the master plan. But drawing as an anthropologist on the side and paying attention to people, quite a few people, anthropologists especially, have asked me, well, but you're an architect, why didn't you draw any buildings? This was even a question in my viva. And I was like, I did in the beginning, but I actually don't need to, because just by the way the bodies are placed in that space, I can actually tell you where they are in a building and what is happening. Like I can see, okay, this foot is lifted and they're sitting. I know that this is the way they are sitting, and so they are sitting in the shade or something, or they're sitting on stairs or something like that. And through this kind of like shift and paying close attention people always move, and they move in and out of the hospital as well. So that's where then and everything, the services move in and out as well. The water moves in and out, the streets move in and out, the traffic moves in and out. So that's where then the field site kind of like became softer and started to kind of like become something different. But it was again the drawing practice that when I would get lost with that and get like really worried about, oh, I didn't follow this line of inquiry enough, I would come back and be like, right, no, this is what I have in front of me. This is what I'm seeing right now. And this is the story that it tells me. I'm not quite sure. What did you mean with the dialogues?
I just meant that, like, how do things like tensions on the field or the field not necessarily giving itself up to you immediately, how does that sort of get resolved in the processes of drawing or in the acts of drawing?
So a lot of times it was this moment of actually people coming to me and talking to me about my drawings, like really walking up to me and being like, oh, what are you doing? And then I was able to actually say something. They didn't expect me to speak Burmese. But then they came close enough and started to mumble. So I was able to kind of like say something in Burmese and like, oh, you speak Burmese. And then like, the whole conversation was able to happen, where it would not necessarily have happened otherwise. Also, when there were more like tricky moments, or where the fact that people could see my drawings often resolved a lot of unease on my side. Did I understand something correctly? Like somebody would be like, oh, no, this is actually something different. Or I had a moment where I had drawn a woman lying on a bed with her head down like this, which looked like sleeping essentially, but she was wearing a green longi, a green skirt, which is also the color that the nurses wear, the head nurses. And the head nurse saw my drawing. She would just flick through them, and she saw it and was like, oh my God, I'm not sleeping. And then I was like, no, look, come with me. It's this woman I had drawn. But that in itself showed me so much about her anxiety as the head nurse, not being seen to be sleeping. In other instances, people said straight out, well, you can't write about that. You can draw it and you can show the drawing, but please don't write about it. Yeah.
So it was always like a mediating process between you and the field.
They were little bridges. Yes, definitely. And there are still little bridges back to the field. So yeah, there are artifacts from that time as well.
The question of coming back to the field, actually, like, okay, firstly, drawing as seeing is something that, we bring up in a lot of the talks, and we keep reiterating it to the point that it's almost become a platitude that what is important is the process of looking. And then there's this other thing which says that a line drawn is important not for what it records, but what it leads you on to see. And now this leads you on to see part to me is interesting because it suggests the future life of the drawing, So the process of bringing back the field, redrawing what is drawn, invoking the memory, like, whatever the drawing suggests, and the memory of it that gets provoked from there. There's this drawing in the production of research, in the making, drawing beyond the reporting, drawing beyond the immediacy of the field. How does the drawing then transform? How does it, how do you use the drawing to make an argument, to hold the research? Is there like an evolution that happens with the drawing after the field?
Yes, definitely. I think this, I love all of this work, and this, like, there's the book Drawn to See, like all of this, the seeing aspect. But the more and more I I think about it or work with drawings or art in the more wider sense, so bringing sound into it, bringing installation, bringing fabric into it, bringing film, other media into it. It's more this being with something that has so much value. Yes, the seeing is great, but it comes from this moment of being, and it's this. The drawings really took on a lot of different lives. They went from a sketchbook into a scanner, into a computer, into OneNote, into Photoshop, out onto projector, onto those sheets again. But that was yet again another way of being with those drawings, retracing them, and evoking kind of like now in a different scale. And I'm sometimes accused of not really spelling out my arguments, but letting my readers or the person being in the exhibition figure it out themselves. But I think that works because of the stories that the drawings tell all together. Like, even if I didn't tell people, or people hadn't read the exhibition text, they would come and talk about this in-betweenness. That the installation narrated. Does this make sense?
Yeah, I think the spatial staging of the installation as well sort of like, made you feel that in-betweenness from whatever I could tell from the pictures, it made you feel that in-betweenness in very strong ways. And I like the fact that you articulated it as a seeing with, so the life of the drawing gets extended into collaborative forms with many, many kinds of media. Your two disciplines, you refer to them as the fields you call home. And that's beautiful, especially if you let the field suggest a space. And a lot of orientations towards architecture as a critical space making practice also see it worthwhile to, connect it to anthropological study. So bodies, behaviors, everyday politics, and there are a lot of people writing about this, I'm sure. And the questions are to do with how understandings of space move out of mere occupation to the objects, events, gatherings that produce space rather than simply inhabit it. So, this home that you make from both disciplines, I know you said that, on the one hand, you have the anthropologist who is looking at drawing as a thinking and recording tool, and a way of being active in the field. And then there is the architect, who is thinking of it as drawing out from and speculating on. So how do you bring that, like, what is the overlap for you? Like, how do you think of, like, what are the capacities does it give you in reading space, reading architecture, or how do you take from the field into the speculation?
So I think, well, as an anthropologist, I and with my primary training in architecture, I often have to rein myself in and not go the other way. So go into from like use anthropology to like be too solution oriented necessarily in my scholarship, but let it be sometimes and be like, right, this is what it is right now. Let it be. We do not need to generalize it or make it bigger or do something with it. The other way around, I think what is really interesting is this, we can learn so much from, I hope this is going to make sense now. We can learn so much from the past, like we know that. And a lot of patterns are continuously repeating. And when I'm building a hospital as an architect, when the hospital is built, it's already outdated in a way. But as I am building it, it is a vision for a future. I mean, that's curious to hospitals, particularly because technology moves on so quickly that, yeah, a lot of times it's outdated when it's actually being occupied. So it needs a lot of flexibility around that. But so in a way, this anthropological ethnographic way of being in the now is learning for the future. That's how I would frame it. Does this make sense? Like for this vision that we are thinking about going forward. Also, this very careful, this care extending to the place that we are working with, and that this this uncertainty, the liminal space where we do not know what is going to happen, to appreciate that and be able to work with that. I hope this is not too esoteric, but to be able to dwell in that for kind of like the design process, for example, to not having to have everything figured out. So going to do a site survey, to allow ourselves to maybe look at something that we don't think is at all relevant. It might be later on. Does this make sense? Yeah, I hope.
It does, absolutely. I think you're just talking about, like, an orientation of care that, that gets drawn into different processes. From here, I have a few questions from the audience right now.
Oh, wow.
We have, yeah, I know. We have Vidisha. So her question is that you have spoken upon the usage of different materials in different media. So how does the usage of different media and colors connect with each other? Could you elaborate on this more?
Yes, I mean, I think the media that we use in the research process kind of influences the data that we're getting out of it in a way. So it's and influences the knowledge and the analysis later on. The same way when making an architectural model to decide what material to use to make that model, it might then depend what scale the model is going to be. So it shows you something very different. I'm just thinking, if I'm doing, I don't know, a concrete cast of something of a space, it's going to be very different than if I'm using cardboard. In a similar way, it is this yes, if I'm using like a quick medium to draw, if I just have a black pen and I walk around all the time, I am moving. So my movement is kind of like recorded in the drawings, maybe in the sequences of the drawings. I have like loads of little drawings again and again. So I'm seeing something very different than when I myself place myself in one space and do a whole watercolor. And I spent the entire day in the same space. And it might be raining at one moment, and then it might be the sunny at another moment. I might get too hot, then I might be in the shade again. Whereas so that creates, and I will be seeing maybe one space through like a different a sequence of time. If I would think, if I would rethink and say, okay, what other ways I could make the installation Hospital Echoes other than with, what would happen if I had made it out of paper? What would that engagement have happened? So thinking through different media, what would have, well, I couldn't have done the research with a camera, in the hospital because they wouldn't let me in. They actually, the ethics committee from the Ministry of Health in Myanmar, they were very happy when I said, I'm not going to bring cameras, I'm going to be drawing. They were like, okay, that's fine. Because we thought we don't have issues with privacy necessarily, which is also a question, but the camera was scary for people in that sense. Yes. And as I said earlier, like when I described my experience with drawing as an architectural student, if you noticed, I was supposed to draw with like black lines on paper, like a facade, but then, oh, why don't you use coal? And in that, almost subconsciously, I told you immediately, oh yeah, and then I was drawing light and shadow. So that's a very different engagement with the field or the site or the object. Yeah.
We have another question from Isha Pete. Isha Pete says, hello, Nora. Thanks for the wonderful talk. I have two questions that are related to each other. When you go back at your drawings after the field, are you burdened to redraw, relook, or make the drawing fair? And what would the process when you are collecting those drawings and trying to make sense out of them? Do you add to the drawings from what your mind makes of them, or do they remain as notes from the field? Also, if you have already answered this, I might have missed it. Sorry. I think she's answered it. I don't know. Nora, would you like to extend it in any way?
I have, so I did, what I did to them is I cleaned them up. Actually, I put them into Photoshop and I took all the kind of like words that might be around them out, or other notations. I sometimes have notations of time on the page, or like a note or something, or if I didn't have the right color, I've like, oh, this is this color. I've taken those out. I feel I use them to make vignettes from them. So I tell myself I use them while I was writing to tell myself little stories. So like putting maybe from different days even drawings together that tell like one story. There was in the presentation, there was one slide which had women sitting in different spaces and at different times of day. That I made for myself to kind of like tell a particular story. They are artifacts from the field, but as they come into being as an installation, they become something more. They become an argument in a way. But they're still then also artifacts from the field. Still, it's quite funny. I had a colleague visiting who I worked with at Yangon General Hospital, and she was in my studio 2 days ago. And she was looking at them and she was like, oh, I know him. It's like it was one who was carrying. And he's like, oh, I know that person. I was like, it's so funny. That, I mean, I don't know if she knows him, but actually she might. It's quite funny. Yeah.
I want to ask if anyone else has more questions right now at this point. And if you have any, of course, Joel, could you unmute Prasad? I mean, let Prasad join the call.
Yes.
Yeah. Prasad, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Hi.
Thanks, Nora. I mean, these are questions which are very, very close to us, actually. This is something which we've been working with for a long time now. I don't have a question as such. I'm just kind of, building on what you are saying and from your, from this conversation which is going on. This morning itself, we were discussing this whole idea of inhabiting through drawing. You inhabit like when poetry was described by early Indian, myth writers. So they called poems as expression of body, expression of, it has nothing to do with communication, nothing to do with expressing something, but it is a performance of the body. So not an expression, performance of the body. So it's close to this idea of this continuous practice that one undertakes to inhabit. So music is not about. I mean, the musical practitioners are not about performing somewhere, but they inhabit a place through creating music or conducting, moving their body in order to make sound. So in that sense, it's also a very personal kind of a act. It's a very personal thing. It's your way of doing things, and in that the question of audience becomes very interesting. So it's how do you kind of let the audience come in, or I mean, I'm not even talking of instrumentalizing this form, but I'm just saying, okay, what is the or rather the question of how do you return to this drawing? Like it's once done, and then you move ahead with some, like in the subcontinent. In the subcontinent, we use the term riyaz very often. Riyaz is basically this kind of a constant practice that is undertaken to develop a question. And then you kind of, and every day you practice, and then every day there is one small shift that you make to kind of move towards nothing, no mission, but it's one move that you take. So, and then there is no going back to the previous one. I mean, you go back to the previous one. So how does one go back to the drawing, or go back to one's sketchbook? No, like you go back to the photograph through an album, through an archive and stuff like that. But here, it's a way to inhabit, again and again. And so whether the exhibition is a form to go back, or whether what is, so that is one thing that we are also working on, and it's our question also. And the next one small point I wanted to make is regarding this, drawings that were used before architectural drawing consolidated the way we understand them today. There were plenty of drawing traditions which were used to kind of make these buildings super complicated, and they also have some, they uh, their way of manifesting from the body is itself very interesting. So that's another point. And the last point is about, I think Apuru also mentioned, that you also mentioned, the whole techno-legal hijack. How the judicial language kind of becomes the only language to kind of engage with the world. So it's kind of, and then in that sense, the other forms become blurry. They become kind of analogous. So just kind of asking about how do you, what is the exhibition? Was the exhibition uh, the form to kind of go back to those drawings? Because how does that what does it mean to kind of make this long question that you are working out, make available to somebody else also?
I think in the installation, I think the drawings had become something else.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can answer your question once I have written my book, hopefully, and gone back to the drawings, because that's a really interesting question. And what then becomes and happens to them. That's kind of what I'm trying to find out now in this project, where I'm going back to the original sketchbooks in a way, cutting them up and putting them together and seeing what happens with them. So I think that's the next step now. In a way, this coming back, and I will, yeah, definitely. Thank you for your comments. It's really, yeah, I love I love this connection to poetry as well. I sometimes have conceptualized or tried to talk about those drawings also as visual poems, in a way, but I'm not quite there yet. Thank you so much for your comments. I mean, so interesting. I'll follow it all up.
Thanks. I'll exit.
Sure. Thanks, Prasad. And there's a very nice comment by Apurva Sharma. She's addressing you, Nora, and she says, beautiful reflections. In my own architectural projects, when I work as an architect working with municipal governments, I often think about the embedded ethnography that I'm doing as I work in these extremely dynamic environments. And until I express these relationships on paper, which more an exercise of dwelling on these interactions, and without it, it remains ambiguous and hard to reflect on and understand. I find it hard to break into sketching mode while a meeting is going on to discuss the future of that project. And while I do still do it in my head, a simple looking at myself in that situation, considering the way people are being, yet I miss the kind of encounters and observations that come when I'm able to actually sketch to discover what I'm really seeing. Thanks.
Yeah, lovely comment. I wanted to sketch during interviews actually, and I didn't. It wasn't appropriate. It wouldn't have been appropriate to sketch at that time, but I did do what you did as well, which is
draw it in your head.
Drawing in the head, looking as if I was drawing. Absolutely. And I think also like, we can't do everything at the same time as well. So maybe we cannot be a fantastic ethnographer while being in the same moment as being a really good architect. And I think here collaboration is incredibly valuable as well. And having kind of the sensibility to be able to work with other people and to realize that in order to give all my attention and care to one thing, I couldn't have worked. I was trained as an anthropologist already when I worked as a project architect at the hospital, and I had those sensibilities, and a lot of things, of course, came in. But I can't call my time at the hospital as an architect fieldwork because I wasn't able to bring that understanding to it in that moment. The same, I could not have designed anything at the hospital while my mode of engagement was as a researcher and as an ethnographer. I think that's what I tried to say earlier as well, that that I find it sometimes difficult to not go into architecture mode, into kind of like doing mode in my work as an anthropologist too much, even though there's like applied anthropology now and all of that. Anyway, different story.
And I think it's essentially about taking that leap from the, research, and then because that's how the course is structured over here as well, where in your semester 9, you're conducting research in order to flesh out an argument on a question regarding space. And then that becomes its own beast. And then the next part is always about articulating that turning that into a design question, and then, producing architecture and build form out of that. And yeah, and like Apurva Sharma has also said, we all want to be both. And I think bridging that is what our task over here has been looking at. Are there any other questions at the moment? Okay. Okay, I just had one little note that it's like a concluding note anyway, and it's from Tim Ingold. And it's not because we haven't already spoken at length about the many, many descriptions and the relevance of the drawing, but it's just a poetic note. And it's precisely because it is in keeping with all that we've spoken of and the tenor of this talk. And it says that it goes that the task of life is never finished and that the world never ceases its worlding does not mean that lives are half completed or that the world we inhabit is but half built. Nor does it mean that lives are fragmented and worlds torn to pieces, that like Humpty Dumpty can never be reassembled. The alternative to totalization is not fragmentation, rupture, and discontinuity. It is rather a holism that is anti-compositional, fluid, processual, and improvisatory. And its key descriptive practice is drawing. And it's from the book Being Alive, Essays on Movement, Knowledge, and Description. And I think that kind of also holds your processes, very, very close. I thought it brought that together. Nora, thank you so much. It's been such an important conversation. We actually sent a message to especially the fifth year students saying that, you better attend this talk and ask them not to miss it. But it's been a pleasure. And, please keep sharing your work with us. We'll keep watching out for it also. And thanks. And we'll keep looking out for what's happening next. And to our audience, I'd just like to say thank you for joining us, and we'll be meeting again in a fortnight on the 16th of August, and we'll be talking with Srimanti Saha then. She's an artist. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks,
Bye.
Nora.
Thank
Bye.
you.